I understand all of these points separately, but it still doesn't answer my question. I think that he's still pretty harsh. It's just that Luke is his language are parables, and when he gets to historical events, he already talks about the fulfillment of the prophecy, which is in uh, how shall I put it, inadvertible. Yeah, I mean you cannot remove it somehow. Uh, and also the carnivalesque element you were talking about, it's as much present in John as it is here. Uh, all of the contrast between the meekness of the king and the danger of rejecting him are present in John as much as in Luke. I don't. I mean, I would understand if Luke kind of changed his mind and described this passage much more harshly than originally. But I mean, it doesn't. It certainly does not seem to me more conciliatory than John here. Of course, it's a very critical moment, and nothing could be kind of really mollified here. The choice is yay, yay, nay, nay. But all of the comparison only shows the difference in the language of the narration, which I appreciate very much. I think you have shown it greatly, but I think we probably have to admit somehow that Luke here is about as harsh as the rest of them. It's just that he is faithful to the basic notion that the punishment uh, in reality does not come from the harshness of the king, but somehow it is connected to the parable quite directly. I mean, the conflict is still there. I don't see it resolved. I don't believe that it should be resolved. But
Yes,
uh,
but what was the reaction in the parable? Slay them before me. The reaction in reality. And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it. He wept over it. So you are blind. I would help you, but you don't want me to help. He wept over it. It's a different reaction. In the parable, he doesn't weep over those of his of the embassies. It's a parabolic, obviously, a picture, but in reality, he wept over it. Would you ever today? Would that even today, everything that was in the past, but today, maybe it's your chance today. And then after that, right away, as Luke will say, and then he entered the temple. The next very word about after this lamentation over Jerusalem, and the lamentation of Jerusalem has big history. That's the whole book of Baruch, the disciple of Jeremiah, after the destruction of Jerusalem and taking the captives into Babylon. It is a book which is called Lamentations. It's a short book, but it's Lamentations. And he lament over Jerusalem. So, that's why it is the same Bible. It fits all of a sudden how you kind of, it's completely new pieces of, so to say, of literature appeared in Christian circles. And then eventually they were collected and established as a canon in the end of the 4th century on the councils of Carthage. It were even not any ecumenical councils or big things, local councils. That's our canon. And then later, the church just put it into, right, that, Zechariah, Malachi, New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, and then letters, and then the book of Revelation. It just fits like that. But it's interesting. It's not, how it was done. It was done throughout, the history of the Jewish community with their own Tanakh, with their own Bible. Said, what kind of rights they have to put it into our Bible? We don't recognize this thing. It's our Bible, after all. And the church says, no, it's it's also our Bible. And they even put more things, Vulgate, Septuagint, all other books of the Jews, which were, just transmitted in Greek. And then Luther redo it, had redone it, cutting off all Greek stuff, from his Protestant Bible. But nevertheless, it's interesting how it all comes here. So my point, obviously, maybe it's not that eloquently presented, that, Luke emphasizes this, prophetic weeping and helplessness of the Creator. Because, in short verse, it is stated that who is there? The Creator is there. He answered, I tell you, if this were silent, stones will cry out. Why? Because stones know their Creator. The creatures know it's who created them, recognize the Creator. But how the book of Isaiah opened, the ox knows his master, the donkey his own manger, but Israel does not know. My people does not understand. Who is the Creator? Who is the King of Israel? That's God's words. That's not Isaiah's words. Isaiah just a mouse for it. So it is the same words. The Creator stands there. And that's what he says. In one word, he said to our Pharisees, silent the disciples. If they are silent, stones cry out. So, and then the Creator, and the very next moment, he weeps over Jerusalem. And after the weeping, we can go as soon as you allow to the next scene. He's teaching in the temple, which is
could I?
Sure.
There, it introduces another topic, which I think is very important for us to discuss. I don't know, only here or everywhere, maybe. The question of freedom and determinism. Because human creatures, unlike stones, unlike animals, are free to accept or reject their maker. And it seems that by now, determinism begins to rule. That's probably what Christ is lamenting on the mountain. That people have lost their chance somehow to be free. That by rejecting the Lord, we actually freely choose non-freedom. And this seems to be probably the most important, to me, in all of the Gospels. It seems to be the most important message of not only of the crucifixion and redemption of the Lord, but of the reason for all of that. Namely, the Lord cannot make us choose him. The only choice he has left now is to become one of us. So that may explain why the parable of Luke, the last parable, is so harsh, and yet the narration dwells on this topic. This topic interests me no end for many reasons, including like the governing plots, the leitmotif of all of Dostoevsky as a Christian writer, that essentially the biggest peril of choosing freely is choosing slavery. That you can
choosing what?
Slavery. That you can freely choose to become a slave.
Oh, slavery. I see, slavery.
Yes, and this seems to be a very dramatic issue here now. I don't quite know how it fits, but it seems to fit all of the Gospels when they come to the story of the crucifixion. They do it, you're right, they do it from very different angles, especially John, as compared to the rest of them. But it seems to be the key message of it to us, of the action itself, of the redemptive act itself, that essentially there comes a point when our freedom becomes very dangerous, because if we choose wrong, we become determined. I find this a very valuable notion, but I think it's not, if we account for the specifics of that last harsh parable by Luke, that's probably how he addresses this very kind of existential choice, the crux of the choice.
Oleshka, it is a very anti-Calvinistic statement.
I don't mind it to be anti-Calvinistic. It's just I find it very interesting how it suddenly becomes so important in Luke, in his language, this opposition between the harsh parable and the lamentation.
Why I'm saying that, because this Calvinism or determinism is looms very heavy on the Christian thought. Neither Orthodox nor Catholic which has succumbed to it. But even in Augustine, there's a very strong point of determinism. There is a even slight possibility to understand Paul in this way when he says that the creator is free. He can make like a potter. He make pots for elevated usage and for low usage. But even that can be honest. But I agree that the church almost blindly was stick to the point of complete freedom of the creature. So there's no determinism from the God's point. That God, kind of determined one for these things and others for other things. So, and here in Luke, that is precisely, it is so obviously presented, even with this kind of allusions to Isaiah, to the Isaiah's beginning, which we just referred to Zacharias that we discussed last time, and even to John presentation, was that even disciples didn't understand the meaning of it, because the meaning of this entrance, it's open. It's open. You can understand it in many ways, but not in a ways of the royal entrance. Therefore, Pilate was very reluctant to accept that Jesus is pretender to the political power. He was forced to do it, though it was his direct responsibility, actually. He had his spies and so on and so forth. So obviously he knew what is going on the Passover in Jerusalem. because usually it is over the Passover when the people come from all over, then all kind of revolts will, fire up against the Romans, against, local rulers. So everything was clearly under control of the Romans. And so they saw this, this kind of scene as some kind of funny, Jewish carnival, on for the feast. Someone, and the prophet or pretender to prophet to be a prophet enters on a colt tied to a donkey, and people jubilate. So what? So what is the danger? What is a crime, so to say? Circus. That's it. And the disciples didn't understand it. Only after he was glorified. I mean, risen. And he was glorified. In which way? He was risen and appeared only to those who accepted him, believed in him, not to everybody. He didn't appear to Caiaphas. He didn't appear to, to Sanhedrin. He appeared 500 brothers, as Paul said, but, those who were. So it is just as he predicts in John. The world would not see me soon, but you will see me. And Judah, not Iscariot, asked, what do you mean that the world would not see you, but we will? What do you mean? Jesus repeats it several times, but, not, also kind of a, not directly. So you have to open yourself even to this understanding. And John precisely, he picks it several times. It's interesting that John does not describe in the same order the cleaning of the temple. He puts it on the second chapter. It's another story why he does it. Some people believe that there were two, some scholars, there were two cleansing of the temple. It's the beginning of the Jewish ministry in the end. But actually, our scholar, Kasyan Bezobrazov, who wrote the whole book on the first Christian generation, he makes a very good point. The cleaning of the temple was such a, drastic measure. It could happen only once. It couldn't just, because, that is the main point of confrontation. Everything is kind of forgiven, could be forgiven, but don't touch my purse. Don't touch the purse of the temple. That's their only power. The money that they collected, nothing else. And what money? Money is everything. You can buy Roman governor on that and everything else. Money rules. We live in the United States of America, after all. We know the point. So, but it's another story. Why John particularly does not put it into different stage of his plot, of his own narrative. But all right, if you ready, we can go to the next scene, which follows right after this lamentation. Any questions or any comments on what we just did today? Already? Okay. And then Mary, 45, 46. Luke, 19, 45, 46.
And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold, saying to them, it is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers.
Okay. Now, look, the description of the the description of the cleaning of the temple in Luke is very brief. Uh, let's let us compare with the description in Matthew and in Mark. And Matthew also is a few verses, but a little bit more detailed. And Mark, Matthew 21, 12, 13.
And Jesus entered the temple of God and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers."
Okay, and in Mark 11, 15, 17.
And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he taught and said to them, "Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations? But you have made it a den of robbers."
Now, obviously, it's basically the same what Luke writes also, but Luke is somehow briefer. Just he enters the temple, draw out, saying these words, and that's it. But John, so he puts this into different scene. In this chapter second, it gives us a little bit different description with more details and more significant, I would say, meaning of it. If you don't, if you, Mary, don't have nothing against it, could you read from John 13, 17? John 13, 17.
The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers at their business. And making a whip of cords, he drove them all, with the sheep and oxen, out of the temple. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold pigeons, "Take these things away. You shall not make my Father's house a house of trade." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for thy house will consume me."
Okay, but interesting. You know, John put it on this chapter second, and how, and what is important in the chapter first. In the chapter first, Jesus is announced by John the Baptist as the Lamb of God. And after second announcement, this is the Lamb of God, the two of his disciples, of John's disciples, follow Jesus. And that's starting, of the ministry of the, so to say, of the 12, as it described right there. After these words, the Lamb. And as we remember, John, at the point of crucifixion, when Jesus' dead body is hanging there, he refers to Deuteronomy and to book of Exodus, that the bones of the sacrificial lamb should not be broken. So he is a sacrificial lamb. So in John, Jesus, in a way, anticipates the new temple of his body, which is set later on in the same story of John, which I'll just read to you. So you don't need any more ships and oxen here. It is all being replaced, because the continuation of this story right there, Actually, if you have John in front of you, can you continue for the end of this chapter, Mary?
Yep. The Jews then said to him, oh, well, you went from 18 or from where?
To 22,
Okay.
from 18 to 22.
Okay. The Jews then said to him, what sign have you to show us for doing this? Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. The Jews then said, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days? But he spoke of the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had spoken.
Okay, so you see that John put it together, all this kind of words, all this exchange about the temple, about that temple is, and Jesus is ironic a little bit here. He said, destroy this temple. He didn't destroy this temple. Exactly, the people who were kind of contending with him, you know, their policy brought the temple as a whole Jerusalem to destruction. What actually he laments in the book of in Luke, in John, it's just presented as one piece. You don't need oxen and because anyway, uh, this temple will be destroyed. But Jesus doesn't say that that it will be destroyed. He responded to the question, what authority you have to do it? What authority you have to do it? He said, destroy this temple and I'll restore it. My authority is an ability to restore this temple worldwide. And it will be the temple of my body. They didn't understand it. Neither disciples again in John understood it. They understood it only after his resurrection. Okay, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about chapter 2 in John.
Okay.
It's important that it's very early on, but it starts with the mention of the Passover too. So it's not just any day that he enters it, but this statement about becoming the lamb then is imperative for that as well. And this ties in with John's very peculiar attitude to narrative time. I think he doesn't care at all about telling Jesus' story chronologically, except of course for the story of the passions and resurrection. But what happens with the events before that, especially in the beginning chapters, is punctuated liturgically and not with the chronological time. So he would indicate the feast to which something is dedicated and unpack the symbolism of this feast for the Jews and its relevance for Christ's own sacrifice all the time. Any entry to the temple would be liturgically marked there.
Yes, Larissa.
And also that this story of the cleansing of the temple is preceded by the miracle in the Cana of Galilee of transforming water into wine, which is also a messianic sign.
Okay.
Yes, messianic and Eucharistic in a way, kind of.
Related to what Olga is saying about liturgical dimension of everything that happens here in these chapters.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So any comments and any questions of what we read, and the next time we'll discuss the following days or teaching and confrontations in the temple itself, how it is done in synoptics, how it's done in Luke. I mean in Mark and Matthew and Luke. Any questions or more comments? Okay, I wish you more clement weather. Next, listen.
Like-
Okay, God bless you all, and bye-bye.
Bye bye.